Okay, now I hand over the host to Imran.
Thank you, Dr. Bob.
Please, Imran.
Normal.
The webinar will begin in 30 seconds. With an opening remarks from Dr. Corin, our organizing committee.
Okay, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 29th Erlangga Webinar Conference Series, the Strategy of Simulation Learning Process in Midwifery Education Webinar Series the third. My name is Dr. Corin, along with my senior Dr. Ahmad Heriana, Dr. Asra, and my colleagues Dr. Imran, Rahul, Arya, Wina, and Dila. We are the organizing committee members of this morning's webinar. This webinar is organized by the Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Erlangga, Surabaya. Right now, the registrants has reached up to 1,413. Before we proceed, allow us to show you the rules of this webinar. Here are the rules for the EB accredited certification. We expect you to have the full participations during the webinar. Your attendance will be recorded by the Zoom application, and by the end of this webinar, participants are required to fill a questionnaire, which the committee will send the link in the chat box. The certificate will be sent to your registered email address. And here are the rules for the Q&A. Please use the Q&A box on the middle of your Zoom panel to write down your question. All questions will be sorted and discussed after all lectures have been presented. We sincerely hope you enjoyed this webinar. We will start this event with an opening remark from our beloved host, Mrs. Andika Ariefreti. Mrs. Andika, the time is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Corin. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to 29 Erlangga Webinar Conference Series brought to you by Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Erlangga, Surabaya, Indonesia. To our honorable speaker, distinguished guest, coordinator of Midwifery Study Program, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Erlangga, Dr. Budi Prasetyo, Medical Doctor, Obstetrician Consultant, Secretary of Midwifery Study Program, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Erlangga, Ibu Dwi Izati, SKPD Master of Science, all lecturer and staff in the Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Erlangga, and to all beloved participants who signed up for today's webinar. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to meet you again at Erlangga Webinar Conference Series. Today is the 29th webinar Erlangga Webinar Conference Series by Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Erlangga. My name is Andika Ariefreti, your host for today's conference. I will inform you that you can join this webinar through Zoom meeting and YouTube streaming channel. Ladies and gentlemen, at the previous Midwifery Education webinar series 1 and 2 on September 2020, we were talking about midwifery education challenge in pandemic and the strategy of the simulation learning process in midwifery education. Today, we will be focusing into 3 topics. There are laboratory skill management, Lowtech versus high-tech simulation in midwifery, and the simulation in midwifery program Universitas Erlangga. We will discuss it from our expertise speaker from Flinders University, Australia, and Universitas Erlangga. Ladies and gentlemen, Before we start this webinar, I would like to introduce our remarkable speaker for today. And today's speaker slightly different from our poster. The first one is Angie Sterland, Bachelor of Midwifery, Master of Nursing, Diploma Applied Science, Registered Midwife, and Registered Nurse as the Senior Technical Officer, Midwifery in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences in Flinders University. And the second speaker is Liz McNeil, as the lecturer and PhD candidate in Nursing and Midwifery College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University. And the last one is Dr. Budi Prasetyo, Medical Doctor, Obstetrician Consultant, as the coordinator of Midwifery Study Program, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga. He will take over Ms. Disa topic. We are very honored to have this amazing speaker for today. And for today's webinar, we have panelists that will be joining us in discussion session. There are the chair of the Association of Midwifery Education, or IPKIN, Dr. Randa Jumudani Ilyas MKes, and Ms. Kristen Graham, Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, Master of Professional Education and Training as a young lecturer in Nursing and Midwifery in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University, Adelaide, Australia. And the last one we have from UNFPA Indonesia representative, Ibu Elvira Lianto dan Ibu Rismawati Imarianti. Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we start this webinar, we will listen together Hymne Airlangga. Okay, now let us move to our main session. This session will be guided by our beloved moderator, Ms. Farida Fitriana, MS BD Master of Science. She is a lecturer in Midwifery Study Program, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga. She graduated from Nottingham University, United Kingdom at 2019. So, well, I would like to give this session to our moderator, Ms. Farida. The time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Ibu Andika. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Hello, my name is Farida Fitriana, the moderator of today's webinar. In this special occasion, I would like to express my gratitude to UNFPA representative, Ibu Dr. Elvira Lianto, and Ibu Risnawati Imang Arianti, our coordinator of Midwifery Study Program, Dr. Budi Prastyo, Medical Doctor Obstetricians Consultant, our Secretary of Midwifery Study Program, Ibu Dwi Izzati, SKBD Master of Science, all lecturers and staff in Faculty of Medicine Universitas Airlangga. And our very special speakers today, we have Angie Sterland, Bachelor of Midwifery, Master of Nursing, Diploma Applied Science, Registered Midwife, Registered Nurse, as Senior Technical Officer, Midwifery in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University, will share about laboratory skills management in pandemic, learning from Flinders. And also we have Liz McNeil as the lecturer and PhD candidate in Nursing and Midwifery College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University, who will share the present topic entitled Low-Tech versus High-Tech Simulation in Midwifery. And also we have our coordinator of study program, Bapak Dr. Budi Prastyo, Medical Doctor Obstetricians Consultant, as the coordinator of the Midwifery Study Program, who will share the topic about simulation in Midwifery Program Universitas Airlangga. And our distinguished panelists today, we have Ibu Dr. Yumiarni Ilyas, Magister Kesehatan, as the chair of the Association of Indonesian Midwifery Education, or AIPKIN. And also we have Ms. Kristen Graham, Master of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, Master of Nursing, Master of Professional Education and Training as an adjunct lecturer in Nursing and Midwifery in the College of Nursing and Health Sciences at Flinders University. In this webinar, each speaker will present their topics for about 40 minutes, and I will make a general conclusion after all their topics, so that the participant can understand comprehensively. All right, after all speakers present their topics, then the session will be continued by discussion. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any question regarding the topics, please write it down in the Q&A box provided in the Zoom, and you can also write your question in Bahasa if you wish, and we will translate it into English for you. Yeah, we will choose the questions randomly. All right, please let me speak in Bahasa. Bapak dan Ibu sekalian, jika Bapak dan Ibu ada pertanyaan terkait dengan topik, silakan Bapak Ibu tuliskan di Q&A box yang ada di Zoom. Kemudian jika Ibu dalam menuliskannya dalam bahasa Indonesia, silakan, nanti akan kami bantu untuk translate ke bahasa Inggris. Dan kami akan menyampaikan pertanyaan secara acak. Alright, without any further hesitation, let's talk about laboratory skills management in learning from Flinders. We have realized that laboratory skills are critically important in health education, particularly in midwifery. However, how is the implementation of laboratory skills during the pandemic? What is the best approach to manage laboratory skills during these times? Well, we have Angie Sterland, who are very expert in this field, will explain us about the topic. But before Angie presents her topic, let me show you her brief profile. Wait a second. Okay, I just want your screen. Right. Angie Sterland, Bachelor of Midwifery, Master of Nursing, Diploma Applied Science, Registered Midwife, Registered Nurse. She has many work experience, as you can see on the screen. Medical Officer, Flinders University, South Australia, from 2016 until now. And also, she is a Midwifery Unit Manager, Women Health Unit, the Northern Hospital, Victoria, from 2012 until 2016, Neonatal Unit Manager, Burnside Hospital, Adelaide, from 2007 until 2012. All right, NG also has several professional memberships, such as Australian College of Midwives, or ACM, and then Australian College of Nursing, or ICN, and also SIM Australia. Her background of education are Bachelor Nursing and Diploma Applied Science, Bachelor Midwifery, and Graduate Certificate Clinical Education, current master's students. All right, without any hesitation, please, Angie, to present your topic. You have 40 minutes. Time is yours.
Thank you, Farida. Welcome from Flinders University in South Australia. Today I'm going to be talking to you about navigating COVID-19 and our experience here at Flinders University and what happened when the rest of the world closed down and we continued teaching in our clinical skills labs. Thank you for the warm introduction, and I hope you enjoy the presentation. On the 15th of March, as you all know, a public health emergency in relation to COVID-19 was declared in South Australia. When the world shut down in response to the pandemic, the Flinders University Clinical Skills Labs continued at full speed. Although the tutorials and the lectures were moved to an online platform, a new set of rules, practices and guidelines were implemented in the skills laboratories. We had some government regulations to interpret, and we needed to enforce them with our staff and students, undertaking a big learning curve to what is now referred to as our new normal. We had to make some tough decisions about who we would bring back into the labs, and we decided to defer the first year students to semester 2 and to prioritise our third and second year students. This was a difficult time, as I'm sure you can appreciate. Children in high school and primary school were learning from home, and we really were challenged by how we could manage teaching in a hands-on practical environment when all the advice being given was to socially distance. So the Australian government were helpful in that they gave us some guidelines and regulations and were very clear about what they were to be. The challenge, however, was how to interpret them and make them work in our space. So the first one sounds simple: social distancing of 1.5 metres between people. Students were allowed to be in a space that accommodated for 4 square metres per person. We had adequate cleaning and disinfection measures in place, but we needed to continue to improve those and do more. We knew that we were not to permit any students or staff who'd had recent overseas travel. Some of you may know that Flinders University has a large international cohort of students, so that was going to pose a big problem for us. And the other thing was that no one could come back to the university if they were known to have had contact with anyone testing positive to COVID-19. So traditionally, our class sizes ranged from 24 to 30 students. We became quite anxious. How on earth were we going to fit that many students in a classroom and continue the same way of teaching in a space that would now only hold half that amount of students? A lot of our staff had been overseas visiting family or holidaying, and some of them were not able to come back and commence the teaching term because of quarantine restrictions and the rules about not coming to university if you've had recent overseas travel. As well as the guidelines from the South Australian Government, the Universities of Australia, working with the Safe Work Australia, also published some guidelines for us. They declared that university business was essential and that reactivation of online campus activities should be encouraged. So the other thing that happened was the prediction that we would need a lot more nurses in our hospitals, and we were asked to fast track our completion of third year students ready to be graduate employees next year or the end of this year. The message was pretty clear from the government and the governing bodies that learning was to continue full steam ahead. So the university's mandate produced a fairly lengthy paper on guidelines and what we needed to be mindful of. For the purpose of the meeting today, I've highlighted the three most relevant points. The first one being the physical distancing controls that must be established and adhered to within the laboratory and specialist learning spaces. And that included managing the access into the building, the labs, the equipment, and those workspaces. Traditionally, our model of teaching in the clinical skills lab meant we had 5, sometimes 6 students working around one simulated patient in a bed. They would rotate through various skill stations, moving around the laboratory at predetermined timings, perhaps 20 minutes a station, for the duration of 3 or 4 hours in their clinical labs. All students would have a break together, return back to the lab together, and then complete their classroom activity and leave the labs together. Our lab spaces were cleaned regularly, but out of hours and usually overnight. So how were we going to manage the equipment and the additional cleaning? Would we have enough equipment between students? And how were we going to tell our staff and students about the new protocols and the new expectations? That was one of the big challenges in the beginning. The second major point from the guidelines were that each lab and learning teaching space had to have a physical distancing plan developed to allow teaching to continue within the safe COVID guidelines. We didn't know what a physical distancing plan was. The rules were given to us without much instruction. These were unprecedented times, and there were no rules or anyone else doing this which we could copy or rely on for information. We had to interpret the guidelines within our own ability and with the means and with quite a quick, short time frame. How were we going to deliver the pre-lab tutorials in our traditional lecture theatres when now they could only seat 1/3 of our usual class student numbers? Having smaller classes meant that we needed more equipment and more access to the labs. More support was required from timetabling to help move the students through the new timetable of the classes. And more classes with fewer students meant that we had to have classes running from pretty much 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock at night. This also meant we needed more teaching and academic staff to support these classes. And as I had already mentioned, some of our teaching team was stuck overseas or was stuck in quarantine because they had travelled overseas. So although we were starting to develop a plan to bring the students back in, we knew already that there was going to be some big challenges. This being one of them. I hope you can all appreciate the humour of this cartoon. We just didn't know how we were meant to keep 1.5 metres apart and still teach clinical skills. If you can't stand next to somebody to take a blood pressure or to listen to chest sounds, then how do we teach that? What do we do? So this cartoon just is very typical of the conundrum we were facing. I need to point out that we did not teach injections in that manner. So the last major point from the guidelines were that each lab and specialist learning space needed to review their cleaning chemicals and new protocols and regularly disinfect high touch surfaces such as the benches, the door handles, and those sort of hot points. The opportunity for increased ventilation by adjusting air conditioning where appropriate should also be considered. Well, like the rest of the world, cleaning and disinfection products became more difficult to source. Our regular suppliers had run out, and we found ourselves trying to find new suppliers to keep up with supply and demand and to manage in the labs. We had extra staff employed to work during classes who are just walking around cleaning the bathroom facilities, cleaning door handles, cleaning every surface that is common to touch, the lift operating pads and buttons, all those surfaces that are touched regularly were cleaned regularly. Students were asked to clean after themselves in the lab in their immediate workspace. So anything that they touched, they had to clean before returning it to a central position, including the documentation, leaving it clean and ready to go for the next student. And where possible, we opened some windows, but that's not many of our labs have that provision. So this one was challenging for us. The guidelines stating that each lab and specialist teaching space must ensure relevant PPE is used where appropriate to avoid contamination and for personal protection. The Flinders University skills labs have always been well stocked with disposable gloves, sterile gloves for sterile procedures, hand washing stations, hand gel, paper towel, adequate bins for disposal. However, we only purchased the hard plastic reusable goggles, and so we had no access to the disposable ones. We couldn't buy them. We had a small supply of disposable gowns, very few masks, and we suddenly had to buy so much more disinfectant and sprays and cleaning items because the students were using it faster than we could restock the labs. So, actioning these guidelines. With our new COVID compliant plan, we resumed teaching in the clinical labs, and this is how we managed it. I will show you some picture slides shortly after this summary, but the students were notified of changes to classes where things had been cancelled when they were resuming, the new timetable and the new rules to be adhered to in the clinical skills laboratories. We flooded the university with posters reminding people of good hand washing protocol, social distancing of 1.5 metres, when to use gloves, when mask use was appropriate. We bought electrical tape and marked crosses on the floor in our laboratory with bright colours at spaces at a minimum of 1.5 metres apart. We marked small spaces with red tape as an alert where we were fearful that there would be overcrowding, and we provided the extra cleaning products throughout the labs. The clinical skills staff attended every class to explain the new lab rules and the physical distance etiquette and how that was to be managed and what the new expectations were. This is just a quick a screenshot of our Flinders Learning online platform with an announcement. So that's how we shared and disseminated all the information to the students for each topic when they were welcomed back and what the new normal looked like in the laboratory. This was really important. So we had to make sure that everyone understood that if they had a fever or a cough or a sore throat or any hint of being unwell, or if they'd travelled over in the past month, they were not to attend the uni, or if they were here, they needed to tell someone immediately. We were worried that students might come back even feeling a little unwell with the pressure to complete their studies in the timeframes given. Lots of students have strict visa requirements that could have been breached if they weren't attending university, not to mention the cost factor if their university degree went on longer than the 3 years. There were posters like this on how to protect yourself, the 6 simple steps. keeping your distance, when to wash your hands, try not to touch your face and your eyes, wipe down every surface when you can, cover your coughs and sneezes with a clean tissue or cough into your elbow, and stay home if you are unwell from school or work. The South Australian Government posted new versions of these posters weekly. It was nearly impossible to keep up, but there were similar messages and some of them in multiple languages as well. Hand washing was the biggest one. I mean, as nurses and midwives, we teach that, but it was now more important than ever to remind people how to wash their hands properly. And the big one, washing for 20 seconds, that's the one that most people become unstuck with, don't wash long enough. So we put them throughout the entire university, as well as in the clinical skills labs. Cover your cough. These are just another example of the government website posters that we have on display around the university. Just a different practice, coughing into your elbow and your sleeve and remembering to wash your hands straight afterwards. The physical distancing one, this was the biggest challenge of all. So how do we stand 1.5 metres apart? As I said, we marked the floor with crosses, and I'll show you that shortly. But it's in our nature to shake hands or to wave or to sit close together. So it were challenging times to learn the new rules and to be mindful of how far or how close we were to other people. Know when to wear gloves. So this was particularly important because there was a national shortage of gloves. So we were making sure that people weren't using them unnecessarily. But just another example of the types of health literature that was being published for South Australia. There was more advice about environmental cleaning and disinfection in the community. So how often do we clean? So this graph, although a little difficult to see, breaks it down into surfaces that are frequently touched and those that are minimally touched. So as I said, Flinders University employed extra staff for the cleaning who did walk around and clean every door handle multiple times a day. Anywhere where there was student and teaching activity underway, they cleaned those surfaces on top of what the students were already doing. This initiative was one of the most helpful things. We put signs outside of each classroom to indicate the maximum number of people that were allowed in that room. This room, for example, on the second floor of our building, E228, was only allowed to have 14 people. So a reminder, with an assumption of having 2 teachers in that space, there could only be 12 students in that room at any time. So it helped us remember how many people were in there, and it helped us to police that and just to make sure we weren't going over those numbers with a quick head count. It also helped us in preparing the timetable and trying to work out which spaces were going to fit which classes. So this is a photo of one of our labs, and you can see, hopefully, the green crosses on the floor. So they are a little bit over 1.5 metres apart. And we did that with the assumption of 3 people working around one simulated patient for their learning. And they would take turns to be on each cross as they needed to progress through their skills learning. The cross at the foot of the bed by the overway table was meant for the nurse-student midwife learning to document and filling out the paperwork or reading the medication orders. And the 2 crosses on the side were where you stood to do assessment, to communicate with your patient or to practice a skill. That's just another angle that shows you. So that was even a challenge. When you put the crosses on the floor at the right distance to be compliant with the guidelines, you're actually quite far away from the bed. So it was a challenge for the students not to crowd each other and to keep that distance, but there was a good visual reminder of how far apart we needed to be and just to be patient and take turns. We put red lines on the floor. This is a photo, although you can't see what's inside, it is a sluice room as well as a medication area. We put the red lines there because we figured this was a critical space and the risk of overcrowding was high, with lots of students wanting to go and get medication and intravenous equipment. So the idea was that on a red line you needed to stop, you needed to check if the area was clear before you proceeded. The number of students allowed is actually marked by crosses inside the door, and you had to come back later if it was full, or as you can see there's a green cross that's empty over by the pan flusher. You could go in. So it was just to avoid overcrowding in those critical spaces. This is an example of how we got students to wait before they entered classes. So this is outside and on a rainy day, unfortunately, for this class, but those witches' hats are 1.5 metres apart. So the students understood that they were to line up waiting next to a witch's hat. When their class was ready to start, they were invited inside, first of all applying some hand gel, then one by one putting away their bag, and then going into the classroom or lab waiting for class to begin. I can't stress the importance of maintaining good attendance records. So the university has always kept an attendance list or a class list of students coming in, but now more than ever, this was critical. In the event that we had a positive case of COVID at the university, we needed to be able to do contact tracing and management. So sometimes these had been ad hoc, and now these are all recorded electronically and centrally. The topic of masks is highly contentious in Australia, and the information at the time of resuming the clinical skills lab was that masks were not required. To manage at the university, we put the posters up that were developed by the South Australian government, which reinforced that masks were not required. If a student did come to class wearing a mask, we questioned gently why. Were they feeling unwell? Were they fearful of becoming unwell? Was it precautionary? What sort of mask they were wearing? And after some discussion, we asked the students to remove the mask and dispose of it appropriately. And if they did declare that they were feeling unwell, then we sent them home and advised them to get tested. Students were reminded constantly to self-isolate and not come to labs if they were feeling unwell and not to attend the university. So that's how we managed the students, but I must say that it was quite an emotive time for staff as well, with lots of requests for masks. People were fearful of the unknown, and really wanted the mask as precautionary and just, from out of the fear factor. And one of the issues was that we could not buy any. So South Australia very quickly ran out of masks, and of course the hospitals and acute care settings were given priority for that equipment. Just as an update, as of yesterday, there were 27,265 positive cases of COVID in Australia since the pandemic began, with only 475 cases in South Australia and only 4 deaths in South Australia. So we were considered to be in a fairly stable state, but very different to the rest of Australia. So this is the poster that the South Australian government put up about not necessary to wear masks. I should advise, though, that not so long ago, only about 6 weeks ago, all Victorian citizens have been asked to wear masks when out in public, and it's become lawful. And if you are caught not wearing a mask out in public, you can be, it's a crime. But not so in South Australia. So that's been one of the other challenging things, is that we are one country. Our different states and territories have different rules and different management at the moment for all of that. And some of our students come from interstate as well. So quarantining rules and things made this logistically quite a challenge. This is a photo of the equipment and how we managed it. So rather than leaving it in its usual positions around the simulation lab, we put it in a centralized position where it could be more visible and so that it could be shared a little bit more evenly, and so that we knew when it was in the center of the room, it had been cleaned and put back ready for use. So you can see a packet of Tuffy 5 wipes on one of those trolleys. That's one of the products that we were able to purchase, and the students were aware that they had to clean that piece of equipment thoroughly before putting it back ready for the next student to use. The paperwork that we used for our learning was laminated, and we had little textures that rubbed on it and then rubbed out easily afterwards. Even the paperwork was rubbed down between students and classes, just as a precaution. So this became the new lab rules. The students remained at one bed in the skills lab in groups of no more than 2 to 3 students, and they did not rotate. When practicing taking vital signs, the students did practice on each other, but not for longer than a few minutes before swapping to another skill. Whereas traditionally, or historically, we would have practiced for up to an hour of that skill at a time, but we were mindful of the exposure. And so, as I said, did those in short bursts and not for very long. All the equipment was cleaned after every use with a neutral detergent and disinfectant wipes. More importantly, out of all of this, we realised that we were not going to be able to run our classes as before, and we were worried that some skills and learning would be missed because of the shorter classes and the shorter and the sort of smaller class numbers. So what we did was make note of any skill that was missed or had to be left out to make sure we included it in topics later in the year or next year. Where mannequins and specific medical equipment needed to be cleaned, we just followed the manufacturer's recommendations. So jumping back to the skill not practice and how we noted that for future labs, what we have done is develop a skills participation checklist for the students. So each time they have an opportunity to practice a skill, it is signed off by their academic support, their teaching team. And it's important to note that this is not a record of competency. This is just a record to account for opportunities to practice. So this supports the learning program, and if we needed to revisit skills, we can go back and look over these records and see what the students may not have had an opportunity to practice. So these are maintained by the student, but we keep a copy as well. So the university was a very strange place at the start of all of this. The campus was empty. The usual hustle and bustle was replaced by empty car parks, closed rooms. The cafeteria was closed. Meeting rooms were closed. All catch-ups were by Zoom and Teams meeting. Where staff could work from home, they were made to do that and given support for equipment should they need it. Staff who were deemed essential to be on campus had their office space reviewed to make sure that there was no overcrowding of shared spaces, and lots of staff were relocated to new offices to make sure that we were meeting that 4 square metre rule of space per person. It sounds like we had smooth sailing, but there were a lot of issues and probably issues that are going to be pertinent to universities and education facilities worldwide. The biggest one was the issue of supply and demand. There was a shortage of soap and hand sanitizer and disinfectant. Supermarkets had to impose restrictions on shopping items. You may have had the same trouble with toilet paper over in Indonesia, whereas the shops in Australia were stripped bare of toilet paper. Mad panic. We were only allowed to buy 1 bottle of hand wash. We were only allowed to buy 1 packet of wipes. So it became really difficult to get that equipment. There was a shortage of masks and gloves worldwide, so we had to find new suppliers who could only give us a few, which meant we had to have multiple suppliers for a few items, and this became a daily activity almost, trying to source this equipment. The new model of teaching, with students staying in one place and not rotating, meant that they did a lot of these activities individually and less as group work. It also meant they had more opportunity to practice, which meant there was an increased use of the consumables in the lab. We are yet to cost that, but early estimates would see that nearly being doubled as from previous years. Some of the other lessons learnt were that we didn't stagger the class times. So we had hallway congestion with 2 or 3 classes waiting to go into their laboratory at a time, and making the physical distancing with 60 students outside of the labs waiting very difficult in some areas. And there was a heavy reliance of electronic communication with the changes to timetable and campus activity, and not every student got their messages accurately, or there was a lot of misinterpretation of when to come and where they should be. So a few teething issues. With the shortage of masks and gloves at a time when managing PPE was imperative in hospitals, the issue was that we couldn't teach it to students and get them to practice. We just didn't have enough, which meant we had to do this by teacher demonstration only. So that's one regret that we have, but an issue that we couldn't manage any other way because of the shortage of gowns and gloves. So just when we think we've got it all sorted out, the government announces a change of plan. We are doing so well with our COVID-19 infection rates staying low, the government changes the 4 square metre rule to a 2 square metre rule. The restrictions around Australia are still very different in every state, but South Australia now requires a trained COVID marshal. The training for this is free, supported by the South Australian government, but meant more personnel required to manage this. So what did we do? We left the 1.5 metre markings on the floor. We did change the room numbers capacity to reflect the 4 square metre rule, but where possible, we tried to keep the smaller classes running in the current timetable. So we made that decision, and hopefully moving forward, we can keep to this plan as well. To help police all of this, the South Australian authorities published some guidelines if you're wondering what the 1 person per 2 square metre rule is and how to calculate that. So in the early days when it was the 4 square metre rule, we had to go back to our architectural drawings and design and work it all out, minus the space that was taken up by beds and lockers and other medical equipment. So it's not just a simple calculation of the width and depth of the room, but that's there in this example. The police in South Australia and indeed in Australia were also policing the 1.5 distancing, and we did have a few visits from the South Australian Police on campus just to check that we were COVID-19 compliant. And we currently have a COVID-19 marshal in our cafeteria area because this is seen as one space where overcrowding can occur. So that is being carefully monitored daily. 2021 and beyond, what does that look like? The new normal, the new catchphrase. So far, we've had fairly positive teacher and student feedback. They've enjoyed the new ratio between staff and students and feel that they've had more opportunity to practice. They have felt safe. We have surveyed that and well supported at Flinders. We wonder and we hope if we've set the students up for success with the fast tracking of their 3rd year and 2nd year classes. At the minute, consumables are still in short supply and rationed between all health facilities, meaning the university is not priority. We know that some of our historical timetabling methodologies are no longer workable, so we have got some work to do before the end of the year to plan for next year and to see what they will look like with reduced numbers and a similar model of teaching. And at this point, our student numbers and enrolments are still uncertain. We still have some of our currently enrolled students not able to return for second year who are still caught overseas and not being allowed to come back. And it's been a stressful year for everybody, and a difficult time for students. So I need to also mention that students were not penalised if they did not attend a compulsory lab. If they were unwell and needed to stay home or go home during a lab, they were given time to make up that class and lab and special considerations for their assignments. So again, just stress that no one was penalised for the new model of teaching. They're my references, mainly a link to all of the government websites. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today and to share our experiences at Flinders University, South Australia.
Okay, thank you, Angie, for the insightful and very useful presentation. Please stay with us because we are now moving to speak about low-tech versus high-tech simulation in midwifery. Well, we all know that providing a high quality of laboratory skills using high-tech simulation often becomes so challenging, particularly in low-resource settings such as in Indonesia. And the biggest question is there any solution for the challenge? So we have Liz McNeil here, but before Liz presents her topic, let me to show her brief profile. All right, as you can see on the screen, Liz McNeil, PhD candidate. She has several work experience such as at Flinders University as nursing counsel from 2003 to 2017, midwifery lecturer from 2000 until now, and then Australian Red Cross first aid senior trainer from 2008 until 2010, and then Department of Health pandemic mask fit testing from 2006, 2007, and 2009. Liz also has several professional memberships such as Australia College of Midwives or ACM, and then Australia College of Nursing, then Australia and New Zealand Association for Health Professional Educators, Higher Education, Research and Development Society of Australasia, and then Simulation Society in Healthcare, SIM Australasia, Australia Sim Society in Healthcare, EBP Health Champions Maldives. The background of education, as you can see on the registered nurse or registered midwife, Bachelor Health Science, Bachelor Midwifery, Graduate Certificate Education, Graduate Certificate Critical Care Nursing, and Graduate Certificate Flexible Education, Simulation in Healthcare, Master's Nursing. All right. Okay. Well, Liz, you have 40 minutes to present your topic. Time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just do the sharing and hopefully, oh, wrong one. No, right one. Can you see my presentation? Oh no, what's happened?
Yes, we can see clearly.
Excellent, good. Sorry, my screen just flashed on me then and just freaked me out. Thank you very much. And I'm very pleased to be invited back. So part of the presentation that I'm doing today has also got some answers for some questions that were raised at the end of the presentation last time that I spoke. So I've kind of tried to weave these through the presentation. And I've learned some new tricks, so hopefully they will work as well. So I'm going to talk about some simulation terminology first, because understanding the same terminology means that we can actually talk about the same things, because there's some terminology that is confusing or is used in different ways in simulation. So I'm just going to do a little bit of that first. And then I'm looking at resource options. So I've got a mixture of low resource, low technology, high technology, low cost, high cost, some extremely high cost, and looking at the differences and how we go through and teach those. So all the definitions and the terminology that I'm using is coming from the Healthcare Simulation Dictionary, which the Society for Simulation in Healthcare have put together. Now, if you go to their website, which is the ssih.org/dictionary, you can actually download it, and it's a PDF document. And so it's something that can be used. This is a second edition, and it was really interesting when I was looking through it this morning, that they've also got a section at the end that is for terms that they no longer use now. And one of the terms they no longer use now is Confederate. And so Confederate was what we used to call an academic staff person who was in the scenario when we were doing big scenarios. And so they've actually taken that term away. So it's, once again, that terminology and seeing what's happening in other places is important. So all of these terminologies are in that document. So as I kind of mentioned last presentation, one of the most confusing terms in simulation is the difference between realism and fidelity. And realism is both how much it looks real, but also then looking at how much it's believed to be real. And that's really important for the student buy-in. So they kind of got to have a learning contract where they agree to go, right, so whatever we're doing now, we're going to treat it as if it's actually real. If it doesn't look as real, then we're still going to treat it as real. So it's still important to understand what you're trying to teach. And the reality is that the top part we don't need to know about, but it's the definition here and having the understanding of what the definition means. But you can also see down here that it links to other elements within the dictionary. So realism and fidelity really kind of do get interused, which is okay. What gets confusing is fidelity and technology levels. So when we're looking at high fidelity simulation, the important thing to think about is this kind of last bit here in italics. So this kind of high fidelity, that realism, can be done with using a human, using a mannequin, using a part trainer or a task trainer, or virtual reality. So it's all very much related to that environment and how much the students can believe. And sometimes if you've got a very expensive mannequin and you're wanting to teach something such as seizures, and if the mannequin can just shake their head and that's the extent of their seizure, the buy-in from the student is not going to be as much as if you've got a human lying in the bed doing a full-on seizure, starting with a partial and then moving on to a full tonic-clonic seizure. The buy-in there is more important. And especially if the person does obstructed breathing after, or sounds like obstructed breathing after the scenario and after the seizure, because that adds that extra level of reality and, oh, what do I need to do? I'll protect the airway. So it all kind of, once again, goes back to the learning outcomes, which I'm going to refresh shortly. And then it's looking at technology enhanced healthcare. So technology, low technology, medium technology, high technology. There's a whole range. So it can go from realistic to computer-based to desktop, the whole range of activities. Most of our teaching, when we're looking at simulation, so simulation or a simulated tool is something that we use that's not real. So it's not the real patient, it's not the real pregnant woman. We use simulated activities, and then we actually have simulation and simulated scenarios. So simulation is almost everything that we teach, but you've got tasks, you've got non-task skills, which is your communication, your critical thinking, and then you have your scenarios where you're putting things together. And this is when hybrid simulation. So you could be using different levels of technology to reach the scenario effect that you want. And that's when you could be using a kind of a pillow that represents a woman, but then you've got a balloon or a VE box that you can then get students to do a VE in, and then they can actually tell you what they're measuring and what they're thinking they're measuring, and then they can process the scenario from there. So you may have it, and we've done it as well. We've had the sim mother on the bed. They've gone through all the talking with that. We've then had a VE box, and there's a picture later on to show you what that is. They've done the check in there, and then they've come back and actually followed through with the rest of the situation. So the hybrid scenarios are quite frequently what we do. So I'm very much kind of all about the learning outcomes, but also the learning objectives. So to work out what level of simulation, what level of technology, and what level of reality is important, you need to know what you're trying to teach. And therefore, starting from that allows you to then look at what you can use. And if we kind of go back to this lovely learning pyramid as well, then just the reading of it doesn't sink in an awful lot. But if we get them practicing doing, and I know that this is one of the big challenges, especially if you're in, I think it's an orange area and a red area, that they can't come in on campus. So how do we get them to practice when they haven't got all the equipment there? Because the more they do that practice, that dexterity, you're involving your hands, you're involving your thinking. And if you involve the talking out, you're going to learn more than if you're just sitting and watching, or if you're just sitting and doing. And that's that teaching as well. So getting students to teach a skill and having other students watch it and maybe working through and go, oh, but you didn't skip that, you missed that. And this was demonstrated really well on YouTube that I watched the other day, of a father making a peanut butter, and they call it jelly in America, but it's jam sandwich. And two of his kids, which would have been about 10 and 12, were writing instructions, and he was following those instructions to the letter. It took them about 10 goes, and each time the two kids would go back and write the instructions again better. And then he would still do it as it says. And they'd go, no, that's not what I meant. And he goes, but that's what you've written. So that ability to write something, get somebody else to read it and do it, go back and rewrite it and keep doing that process is a really good learning process as well. And it's a good for demonstration. So some of the resource options. One of the questions that I got asked was where you can look at for equipment. These are some of the bigger players that we get some of our equipment from. And if you have any questions about which equipment comes from which shop, Angie is the woman to ask. She has a much better knowledge than I do because she does the ordering of them. I just get to play with them once we've got them. So these are some of the big manufacturers, and they have an assortment of models. So I've tried to include which models I'm talking about. We use a lot of Lardell. They are expensive, but we're also looking at alternative means because it is trying to get what we want to do against the learning outcome. So one of the other questions from the last webinar was, where are we doing the teaching and what resources are available? And is it possible to do simulation in the clinical setting and not in a campus lab? And what first steps to prepare are necessary? So this is one of our simulation labs at university. We're very lucky. We've got a couple of high technology rooms, we call them, the sim suite. So they're designated, they've got two-way mirrors. So you can see here it looks reflective, but you can see in from the other side, and we've got control rooms in this room as well. So we can set this up to whatever venue that we're wanting, but that's not always convenient, especially if you've got travel restrictions, if you've got limited resources. So going and doing simulation in the actual venue that people are working in is quite common, and it's called in situ, so in situation. And it's really good in particular for interprofessional. And so PRONT and PROMPT are two big programs that are run, especially within midwifery, that bring in everyone to do with obstetric emergencies. And they are done either in a resus room, depending on the hospital, or they're done in the side room if they've got a vacant room, if they haven't got a designated education centre. So it's a matter of using the equipment that is there, which means students can have a better understanding, and especially with students feeling like they're missing out at the moment because they're not able to come in on campus, that when they're able to go back onto placement, it may be that the clinical facilitators or the staff who are looking after the students need to do some really short education sessions on the ward where they are, in a quiet corner, in a tea room, in an empty room is ideal. Doesn't happen often because usually the rooms are filled quite fast. But it's sitting there and going, okay, so here's a scenario, what would you do? And you can have someone pretend to be the patient. You can kind of go through the motions of what equipment would you have? Okay, don't open it because we need to use it. But what equipment? Tell me the equipment. So instead of opening up a delivery pack, saying, well, I would need to have a galley pot, or I would need to have some swabs, or I need to have 2 clamps because we're clamping the cord, and then I need to have a pair of scissors to cut the cord. So you're still having that learning, but you're doing it in the area. One of the most annoying things if you're doing it in a ward and you're doing it in an empty room is if somebody wants to come in, you have to be prepared to move out fast. I've done it, and I used to do it with the emergency box before they were locked. So a lot of our emergency boxes have got plastic tags on them now. And so before those days, or I'd get permission, I would tell everyone which room I was in, where I was, and that I had the emergency box. And I had the understanding that if the emergency bell went, I would bring the box to them so that they knew that it was coming. So, and I would send a student to where it was to let them know that I was going there. And I was responsible for making sure that it was fully stocked and properly ready for afterwards. So that's some of the extra responsibilities on the teaching staff. If you are going to use anything and you're taking something into a space, make sure it goes back. Or if you find things that are missing, then actually go and grab the students, show them how to restock. Like with the rollout for the, we've got bags, hanging bags on the end of the beds that have oxygen tubing, nasal spec masks, Hudson masks on, that are usually behind most patients. And so in most bed spaces, and quite often you can go in there and find where it's an empty space. So it's a great opportunity then to take the students, show where the store cupboard is, and then go back and fill it. So once again, you're showing them real skills, but you can still do that in the setting of where they're working, depending on how busy they are. And also if the educator is able to be supernumerary for that time, or if they're counted in the staff on the floor, then that makes it harder for them to kind of go through. But you can also just grab, if you've got a student with you, you're working as a midwife or as a doctor, you've got a student with you, somebody else is free, you can get together and do a very quick, okay, so let's talk about kind of shoulder stocia. Okay, so what type of positions? And you can do something very ad hoc and kind of do show and tell and also talk through. And they're kind of forms of in situ simulation. So it doesn't have to involve multiple people. It's simulated learning as well in the clinical setting. We can also do fun desktops. And I was thinking of the question, one of the questions which will link back to is IT issues, especially for remote students as well. And so I was thinking about what are some of the things that you can do. So you could email a whole pile of different pictures on different things. So here we've got the nurse, we've supposedly got, I'm not sure if that's the anaesthetist who's had too much gas or if it's the dad, we've got the pregnant mum, we've got somebody with a needle, and we've got a whole pile of different drugs as well. And so you could have multiple students who could actually have the same equipment, and then you could be talking them through of, okay, so you're going to have different midwives, you're going to have doctors, you're going to have other allied health as well, depending on the scenario. And you can actually have people talking about who they would bring in, or they could actually film themselves playing out a scenario or playing out a procedure. And that could once again show their understanding of who comes in, but also the timing, which is part of that critical thinking as well. I have to admit, I have a very soft spot for this kind of creation. So you'll see some very familiar faces there. And this was looking purposely at low tech and low resources. So this is a baby's outfit, so a little bit bigger than a baby. It's a toddler. We stuffed it with some padding and I think some rolled newspapers in the arms. We used the balloon as a head, so hence this was called Blue Boy, and we drew a face on the balloon. But the mum was worried and saying that her child had breathing difficulties, and you could do exactly the same with a mannequin. And here I've got this is a doll bought from a shop. I just kind of put in baby doll, and this can be bought from a shop. Then you have the equivalent high-tech version. This is Sim Newbie from Lardell, which is worth several $1,000s. Is brilliant to use and has heart sounds and chest sounds and breathing sounds and can go cyanotic. So there's a whole level of different things you can do, whereas this one's just a doll. But the way that we did this scenario is that we had just a smartphone. And on that smartphone, we had some different breathing sounds. So we had some wheezes, we had some crackles, we had a bit of a grunt. And then as the doctors or midwives were doing their assessment, we played that out loud. So they actually heard the sound kind of, instead of music, they actually just heard the breathing sound or the grunting sound. And that was what they had to respond to for that scenario. So then they were sitting there going, okay, so we need to put some oxygen on, or we'll need to give some Ventolin. And so they went through the motions of doing that, put the Ventolin on, and we said, okay, it's been 10 minutes now, so you just speed up the time. And then they do another assessment, and then we'd have a different breath sound that they could play. So that kind of works with very, very low tech, because most people have got smartphones. You do need to be organized. So you do need to know, once again, what are you teaching? What do you need to have loaded onto the phone? And my advice, always have at least 2 people load the same sounds, because if someone's phone dies or it doesn't play, you've always got someone else who's got a backup if you haven't got kind of 2 phones, because if technical issues happen, they're going to happen in the middle of a scenario. This is something that we are using increasingly more for nursing than for midwifery. But this basically, whilst it looks impressive, and it is, it's actually just 2 iPads that talk to each other. And the software, it has its own wireless connection. So you don't need to be plugged into external wireless. It has its own little kind of internal loop. And so you can take it anywhere, connect it up together, and you can actually change the obs. You can change, and this one is in particular for the CTG, but you can also set it up as a general monitor as well if you're wanting to look at high dependency, or if you haven't got the equipment to look at blood pressures, then you can actually set it up there. They can be talking to, once again, you can have somebody live, have the wires connected to them as if it is an ECG, and then they can go unresponsive, and then you can actually see that on the monitor. So it's another tool that increases what we can do. It's not as expensive as what the mannequins are, but it means we can use it with anything. So we can use it with a doll, we can use it with a mannequin that's not got any technology at it. So this is going from one extreme to the other almost. So this is Sim Mum. So this is the Lardell product. CNA do Lucinda, and I think there's another birthing mannequin, full torso mannequin as well. This has 2 options. So we can birth her manually, in which case we generally put our arm underneath her belly and push the baby out, or there is an automatic delivery module in there as well that goes for cephalic as well as breech birthing. The problem with that is that it's annoying because it doesn't always work. You can't have her sitting up. She's got to be completely lying down flat. you've got to include the time to undo it, to reload it, to lube it. It's a lot faster just pushing her through, but you can also do damage to her cervix if you're not very careful with pushing through as well. And the new one, so the new one's kind of come out. She's absolutely gorgeous. She's not wired. We've got the old one who's plumb to air, plumb to kind of IT, who's got lots of wires coming out of her, so we can't really move the bed. The new one is tetherless, so minimal cables, works off of an iPad as well as the computer, and whereas ours costs kind of quite a few $1,000s, this one still does. And I'm going to say only 35,000, but it's still expensive and we can't afford to upgrade. But it's a lot cheaper than what some of the other mannequins are, which nursing have used. And to update one of those essentials is almost $70,000. So they're not cheap. What you can do with them can be impressive if you use them properly. If you use them frequently, then they will give you the money back for return of interest or return of investment. But if you don't, they just collect dust. And interesting to see now that, so this is coming from Liddell's website this morning. So they've got both a Caucasian and a darker skin Sim Mum. They're also selling Sim Mum now, the tetherless one, with Mama Berthy. And Mama Berthy is the second generation of Mama Natalie, which is this pack here. And it's what I took. I took Mama Berthy with me when I went to the Maldives to do some training over there. And it's light as, it's brilliantly light, fits in a suitcase. And it's got a nice pelvis that you can actually clamp to a desk. And then you can do birthing, you can do breech, you can do a lot of things through that, and a lot of scenarios and a lot of different kind of teachings, cord prolapse, the whole lot you can do through Mama Berthy. Mama Natalie doesn't have as much of a pelvis, but you can still do, she's very much fabric with her cervix and bottom, so she hasn't got a pelvis, sorry. But you can still do some cappets. You've got a better, in fact, Mama Berthy's got a better placenta because it's got trailing membranes, well as the Mama Natalie hasn't. And once again, looking at the different part torsos, at what you can be available to, and these are looking at assortments. So this is what I was talking about for the VE box. So this is something that has got some silicone cervixes in, and you can kind of go in, you can't see, and we can change. So at the back, we can change what dilation is occurring there. And we can also use water balloons that can be in there, and that can actually help to do with rupture of membranes as well. So there's a lot of things that we can do. So you could have that on a table. You could have a real person being the pregnant woman, do all the normal assessments. And then when you get to the VE stage, you can kind of go, right, do it over sitting on a table, go do your VE over that side. Okay, you've worked out what it is, 5, 7, 10, and now you follow on with a scenario according to what you found. And that's really interesting because you'll set it up and say, for example, it might be 8 centimeters or 7 centimeters, but the student might come back and say, well, it's 5, or come back and say, well, it's 10. And so their thinking of what happens in that scenario is going to be very much reflective of what measurement they found. This is a breast model that kind of comes in with a whole pile of additives. So one of these breasts you can actually interplace and change. So you can have a lot of nodules underneath for breast self-examination. So you can have something similar to that, and you could make up little bean bags with marbles. So there's a few low-cost things that you could also think of that you could actually have a bigger bra size and put those extra paddings on top of someone wearing a bra, put a shirt underneath, so they're actually feeling that, or you could put that on a mannequin. And so you've got those differences in breast tissues that you can also feel. You can buy these are expensive. You can actually make up some extra things as well. I tried to find a picture of a pull tube IV arm, but I couldn't find one set up. So these are from a variety of different resources. So this one allows us to cannulate and to venipuncture. So does this one. This is from Lardell, I think. These cost, the actual arm itself from Lardell, so that one there costs 750 Australian dollars. Replacement skin, so when you jab it too many times and you've got the IV there, replacement skin can actually cost up to $500 as well, depending on where you buy it from. I have seen, but I didn't take photos, some very, very innovative creations where they've got a pool, we call them noodles here, pool noodles. I'm not sure what you call them, but they're kind of used for rehab and in the pool for flotation. And so what they did is they would cut down the side of that, put some oxygen tubing in, and that would become the vein. And then they'd kind of like have an IV bag at one end, plug it off at the other end, and then put some pressure in it and clamp it down the other end so you've got some pressure. And then they'd put some tubey grip. So one of these, and I've got another picture coming up to show you some stuff, but that covers it all. So you kind of got skin, you can kind of feel the vein. You have to believe it, but it's a low cost way of still getting, how do you hold the needle? How do you hold your hand? Kind of, especially when you've got some of the needleless containers that, and especially with cannulation, where you've got to slide the needle back to hide it, or is it just a normal one, you push it in and thread it through? So that can also be used, and looking at, once again, high tech to low tech. Just looking at my time. Now, this is something brand new. This hasn't actually been, we've never seen it. It's all being promoted at the moment from Lardell. This is their response to the pandemic. So they're kind of touting this as a low cost or affordable multi-skills trainer. I think we've seen in an email, it's about $200 introductory price. So that's per student. That's hugely expensive still. But you've got, so they've got on each side of this, and I recommend if you're interested to go to the website and look at the videos, but you've got, there's a rectum at the, oh, that's a colostomy at the top there. They've got a face there. They've got nasogastric there. They've got a whole pile of other things. So all of these things you can do to what's a cardboard box with a face on. So Resus Annie's face, of course, which is an interesting response to the pandemic and to the fact that students can't come in. So they're thinking that you buy one of these, you have the consumables that go with all of this, and students can work their way through this at home, either through guidance with videos or recording themselves. So looking at how we're scaffolding, so if we're going to kind of go through perineal tears, we can represent that with looking at different things for assessment. We can go through plasticine or Play-Doh, and you can make your own with some flour, salt, warm water, food coloring, and vegetable oil or coconut oil. You can also use foam, and there's a video here. This doctor, Vincent Laporte, actually shows you how to make this up, and he's actually does it for 2nd and 3rd degree tears, but also how to suture them. So he's actually telling you how to suture it with using this sponge, and the alternative is a high cost mannequin to do that. Now, when you're suturing, there's different ways to suture as well. There's meat that you can suture. It depends on what's available and what's kind of culturally appropriate to try and get those suturing up. When they're suturing the foam, a lot of the tips and tricks are to make sure that you, if you can, put some wire in, and the wire actually helps with the some mesh, helps it last a little bit longer because it holds on to the mesh. This is some of the exciting things that are coming up in the future. This is using 3D printed frames, really. So this is a 3D printed frame. And what they've done then is they've used some ready-made silicon mix and made their own silicon models. And so they've also used mesh in here as well. So when they suture, the mesh stops it from just sliding through the silicon just as easy. This is a really cool device. So this is just a wristband with a head, and that's to approximate a cheap way of how to cut an episiotomy when you've actually got a solid object there, which is the reality of when you're doing it. So how do you get it in? How do you stretch? What's the angle going through? And that's replaceable. So you're just getting some of those headbands and wristbands to kind of cut through. And this from a novel approach to simulated, and I was just looking at perineal repairs, and so they've done their own as well. So they've kind of made up with a pool noodle and some tape, they've done the same thing and mocked up a perineal repair so that they can practice their suturing on. So it's about being really creative and being very innovative. This is something that we use a lot when we've got human patients. So it will either be a student or a staff member who's acting as the pregnant woman. And this basically just goes up their sleeve. So it's got a cannulation port, so you can actually inject into it. It's just connected to a 500 ml bag that just goes under the sleeve of the shirt, sits back behind the shoulder blade, and you can run an IV into it. You can give IV medication into it. And it works because, once again, you can actually put some Opsite on it or some adhesive dressing, tape it down if you wanted to, but it is quick to put on and off. And it still allows the students to kind of go through, I need to do the checks for the medication, I need to do the cleaning, I need to do the timing for the antibiotics. So it still allows all of that to occur. And then you've got the Parto pants. So these are trademarked. They're used as part of someone's brilliant invention, used as part of obstetrics training. And so you can do with the prompt that it comes from, which is like our prompt. So that's an interprofessional training of obstetric emergencies, which covers a whole pile of things, and you can have it, different places do it in slightly different ways. But these are pants that you usually go for the largest size scrub pants that you can do. An inner pocket is sewn in with a bit of extra material that becomes the cervix. And then you've got someone who wears them. And as you can see up here, they're pushing the baby down. And they can also have some padding there, and they can do it breech as well. So they can be standing up or sitting down. And then that allows cord prolapse is perfect for this because you're sitting there. If you're worried about it being too close to the person who's wearing its genitals, you can actually put some combines or some pads or a towel under there that acts as a barrier, especially if you're doing cord prolapse. Because if you're doing that and you're pushing your hand up, you need a little bit of protection there for dignity's sake as well. What's been really interesting is looking at how other places and universities have dealt with the pandemic. In America, they have smaller cohorts and more money. They have gone, a lot of them were either just starting using virtual reality or have gone over to doing VSIM. So VSIM is a joint program through Wolters Kluwer and Lardell. And it is basically it's software, it's based in the cloud, so that doesn't help if you haven't got consistent internet, but it means that students go in, they choose the activities that they want to do, and it's like a game. It's a gamification learning in a way. But what's really cool, they've got nursing versions, and it's all nursing, it's American-based, so it's American medication. We have had some of the models Australianized, and I'm part of an international multi-site research that's actually looking at student perceptions of using this in the nursing context with 6 simulations. We were doing a control group and an intervention group, and they were doing it before and after face-to-face simulation. But now, because of COVID and our partner sites can't go back to, they're still under restrictions, it's changing to completely online. So they're doing all of these 6 instead of 2, and we're looking forward to getting that out next year. So when you're looking at from the obstetrics point of view, there's quite a lot of different obstetric emergency scenarios that can be done using VSIM. And the really cool thing about this is that it allows for unique personalized learning. So we don't use it at Flinders in this way, but it means that the students get feedback. They will get a score, a feedback score, because it matches up to an algorithm that's back behind it. It identifies areas that they got wrong, they didn't prioritize, or key areas they need to focus on. It gives a review of a timeline of when students do things, so they can actually go back and have a look, and you get a percentage. And it ends up being a bit of a game that you want to beat your percentage from last time. But it also allows a recording, so you can actually sit there, you can actually have access behind the scenes as an instructor, and you can go in and see how the students are doing each attempt. So are they kind of like spending a lot of time in it and still not succeeding, or are they kind of blitzing through and not thinking about it? But it is a cloud-based product, so it does need to have a stable internet connection. So some of the futures when we're looking at technology, and this is when high technology can be both misleading. So we're looking at the differences with 360-degree learning and filming. So basically you can turn around and you see everything around you, which will be good for those trying to orientate to a venue they've never been at. So Puskesmas or an ICU, you could stand there with a kind of camera and do a 360 filming camera, or you can actually sit and kind of do two 180s. And those cameras are getting a lot cheaper these days. But it's how it's delivered that is the costly thing to look at. And this is when virtual reality, which is completely into a headpiece, so kind of like a nice little headpiece like that. This is actually the equivalent to a Google Cardboard, basically, because you have to put your software on your phone and the phone slides into the front, and it just makes it look easier than using Google Cardboard. Then you've got your Oculus, which is more expensive, and then you've got your HoloLens. The difference with your HoloLens is that you can still see the room around you. And the HoloLens is a self-driven unit, and the head-mounted displays are where the future's going, because the non-head mounted displays need a computer to run, and you're tethered and you've got cords, and that's an issue. To allow maximum student usage, you need it to be basically to either run on an individual head mounted display, but they're still looking at 300 to 500 or more, or you're looking at a cardboard display, which means it can be downloaded onto their phone and then they can look up. And sometimes it's easy as you've got a scene there, a question comes up and they need to tap whether they're going to go or look left or right to actually choose. And that, once again, is that animated branch animation. We're going to see more and more of this coming up. This is where the technology is booming. This is where universities and businesses are working together, gamifications working together. This is going to be the huge advance area that's coming up. Looking at the 360 is great for orientation, but this virtual reality, especially in the cardboard, means that it's going to be available for the masses. Look, one of the other questions, kind of in my last 2 minutes, one of the questions was difficulties in approaching your students that live in remote areas and rely on the internet. Now, sometimes if you can put it in a cloud, they can download it, that they can then use it on their computer. But the other option, the low-tech option, is to put everything onto a USB. So if they need any films onto a USB, if they kind of have all their documents and reading onto a USB, and mail it out to them, or mail it to a central location and they can kind of come in depending on what zone you're in. And that's the way we used to do distance education. We got mailed out folders and folders of reading that were usually kind of too outdated. But to find out how students are going, you can get them to record. They can find anything around the house and do a skill, record it, and then send it back, and you can critique it, or they can talk through skills and put it on a USB and talk it back. So you have asynchronous communication, but you've still got that interaction that's there. And once again, kind of looking, how do we meet competencies? It's about going back to the learning outcomes. What are you actually wanting to teach them? Is it the theory, and then they can do some practice with some innovative simulated tools, or do they have to be on the clinical, and can we make it up after? One of the other questions was, do we need to delay courses? And that's going to be up to whichever areas and what the requirements are, because there will be some delays. If you've got hours requirement for part of the course, or birth requirements for part of the course, such as we've got hours and births, if we can't reach it, then yeah, the courses are going to need to be expanded. And we need to be able to do that so it's not at a great cost financially and emotionally and mentally to students. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz, for the great presentation. Well, before we move to the last topic, we will have a 5-minute video about our activities, particularly in the Center of Excellence program. So please, committee, to show the video. Thank you. All right, thank you for enjoying the video. Now we are moving to the last topic about simulation in midwifery program Universitas Airlangga. For your information, midwifery study program Universitas Airlangga has conducted simulation learning since 2014. And in this occasion, we have our coordinator of study program, Dr. Budi, to share about our experience in simulation learning. But before Dr. Budi presents his topic, let me introduce him by presenting his brief CV. All right, as you can see on the screen, Dr. Budi Prastyo, medical doctor obstetricians consultant. He has so many work experience. 2019 until now, he is a coordinator of the midwifery study program, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga. From 2015 until now, he is also a coordinator of education, Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga. And from 2015 until now, he is also secretary of BKKM unit, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga. And from 2006 until now, he is also an academic staff in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga, General Hospital Dr. Sutomo, Surabaya. Several professional membership, such as member of the Indonesian Doctor Association, member of the Indonesian Association of Obstetrics and Gynecology, or POGI, and then member of the Association of Social Obstetrics and Gynecology, or HOXI. His background of education, as you can see on the screen, medical doctor, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Airlangga, obstetricians, Faculty of Medicine, Unair, consultant of social obstetrics, Faculty of Medicine, Unair, and doctoral program, Faculty of Medicine, Unair. All right. Okay. Before, after the brief CV of Dr. Budi, please, Dr. Budi, you have 40 minutes to present your topic. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mrs. Farida. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me present the topic is about the simulation method in midwifery study program in Universitas Airlangga. I think the previous presenter has explained what about the simulation in Australia. When we developed our simulation program in midwifery study program in 2014. After that, we try to make some improvement, and we collaborate with, thank you, our mentors and our partner from Flinders University, so we can improve our method in simulation in midwifery study program. I think Liz has explained that what is the simulation. In our simulation is any education activity that utilize simulation tools. It is we can use Lowtech or Hightech, but high fidelity on methods in order to create learning opportunities for participants. And we don't have any imagine that this method will be very important in the pandemic era, because we can still do the simulation in, I think, in this time, because if the student contact with the real situation in clinic or in a hospital, it would be a high risk for COVID-19 transmission. So we still use our simulation program and skill labs. So the simulation is mostly is a technique and not almost a technology, but we use the training tools and this technology. because we can use the high technology or low technology. Our midwifery study program has low technology or high technology high fidelity for this simulation. And what is the benefit if we do the simulation in our study program? We can create links between theory and practice. So the student can imagine not only in theory, but also they can practice what they have learned from the classroom. And we can provide a safe environment where the trainer learn without risk for harming the patient. Especially right now, because in the pandemic era, I think we were so strictly change our method of learning. So we use our simulation and skill labs in this time. I provide an environment fully attentive to learning needs, so we can give the learning what they needs based on the scenario. Provide alternative for repetitive training. So in order to achieve the competency in obstetric care, we can do the simulation repetitively. So the learning outcome for the learner can be achieved more satisfaction, and can be adjusted according to the learner needs and enable exposure to gradually more complex clinical challenge and to rare emergency situation. So we can simulate the emergency situation in our scenario because and without the risk of harming a patient. So the student can be exposed in emergency situation earlier than they can get in the clinical situation real, and helps to develop non-clinical skills such as communication, because they must develop teamwork, and they can do the critical thinking and decision making in our simulation. So what kind of skill can be developed through the simulation? I think I have explained that there is a lot of skill and knowledge we can develop a non-technical skill and technical skill. Technical skill, of course, the technical skill like a psychomotor, and clinical skill like resuscitation, neonatal resuscitation, postpartum hemorrhage resuscitation, and I think birthing process also. And non-technical skill like attitude and motivation, self-confidence, because there are some of students still in hesitate to deal with the emergency situation, so we can improve her self-confidence with the simulation. And also, of course, patient safety and leadership, I think, and communication we can develop through the simulation. If we plan to do the simulation, we first we must identify the audience and learning outcome, so we can choose fit within the course or on the topics, and we can set the level of simulation and explain in the debriefing time, and when before we do the simulation. And we also identify the resources that we have. We should set the resources, equipment, and others to set our scenario, and we should set the time, location, and space simulation. And we should like Angie said, that we must know our room, so we can our space, we can estimate how many participants can do this simulation. Before to go to the simulation, we must make some scenario. So we make a lot of scenario in our study program, and the learner, the student should study first in the classroom to know the knowledge to do the skill that we want to achieve in the simulation. So a lot of knowledge must be achieved first before we go to the simulation. And we design the simulation by setting the environment. We give the patient information and background for the situation, and maybe we can give the current patient status, but we remove her real name and others. And even to the occur, we can changing a patient status, propose correct treatment outline, and after that the student, we give the orientation to the student to simulated learning environment. We explain about the tools, we explain about the mannequin, how it will work and others. So before they go to the simulation, they must go to the orientation what we have for our skill labs. And after we give the scenario, we do the pre-briefing. We can give scenario learning objective and the role of the participant, who doing what. So every participant must have roles in the simulation. If some participant didn't have role, but they can be some evaluator for this simulation. And at the time and after pre-briefing, we do the simulation activity, so we can evaluate how they can do the scenario, how the scenario being done by the student, and we can evaluate the teamwork, the communication, the decision making from the student. And after the simulation process, we do the debriefing discussion, which is we ask for the participant how they feel, are they satisfied for that their role that they act. And after that, we can go to you can make a summary to station, like this is the Liz McNeil I think it's program, yeah, read to station. So if possible, we can do the read to station. When we do the read to station and we have evaluate about the impact if the patient, if the student do the read to station. So after simulation, we give the briefing, and after the briefing, we give the student once opportunity to read to the simulation again, and we evaluate the impact of this program. We have some trial, report that the effect of repetition simulation after the briefing on learning satisfaction and learning achievement in midwifery study program. The conclusion of our trial that the rate two of repetition simulation after the briefing simulation increase the level of student satisfaction and learning achievement but although the time that they spend to do the rate to repetition simulation is more than the first simulation, but from statistic is not statistically different. So we do the repetition simulation after the brief method to increase the learning satisfaction and learning achievement. And in our what we found that there are significant difference in the achievement of learning outcome after repetition. So the student can do the simulation more effectively because they have discussed what they feel that in the first simulation, so they can do more effectively in a repetition, and the student do the repetition better and try to improve the simulation after the brief. So although the time is slightly longer, but it's not that significantly difference with the first simulation. And in the conclusion, that simulation helps students also get a gradual learning experience in which the student learn from simple stages and then to more complex learning. And the student can achieve better learning outcomes as evidenced by increased attainment of minimum and maximum score. So I think that's all that for my presentation. I think it's, thank you, Mrs. Farida. I give back to the moderator.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Budi, for your insightful and very useful presentation. All right, before we move to the discussion session, let me to read general conclusion from all speakers. The first topic is about laboratory skills management in pandemic, learning from Flinders by NG. Some general conclusion that I can retrieve are during COVID-19, there are some adaptation in learning process in order to control the transmission of COVID-19, such as Australian government regulation, and then the principles and protocols for reducing the potential risk of COVID-19 transmission at university, and then information about routine environmental cleaning and disinfection in the community, and also the regulation of using mask by the public in the community. All right, and then the second topic about low-tech versus high-tech simulation in midwifery by Liz. We do need to understand some particular terms regarding the low-tech and high-tech simulation. And we can refer to the recommended source, that is Healthcare Simulation Dictionary, and then some terms that Liz has mentioned is about high fidelity simulation, hybrid simulation, simulation tool, and in situ simulation. Some examples of high-tech and low-tech simulator has also explained by Liz, such as in obstetric emergency training, and the using of low-tech and high-tech simulation must we to understand, and we need to aware about how it can be met with the midwifery competencies, especially. Another topic from Dr. Budi about simulation in midwifery program Universitas Airlangga. Dr. Budi has explained us about the planning of simulation in our study program, and then we do need identify our sources that we have, and then some key elements of simulation activities, such as simulation design, orientation, pre-briefing, simulation activity, redo stations if possible, and evaluation. And also in midwifery study program has conducted a research in simulation. All right, that is the general conclusion from our speaker. And then again, thank you so much, Dr. Budi. Angie Sterland and Liz McNeil for very useful and insightful presentations. And now, moving to the discussion session. But before I read the questions from our audience, I welcome to our guests and panelists to give their words. So please welcome to Ibu Risnawati Ima Arianti or Ibu Ima as the UNFPA representative to give your words. Selamat siang, Ibu Ima. Halo, Ibu Ima. Alright, while waiting Ibu Ima. Okay, selamat siang Ibu Ima. Alright, time is yours, Bu Ima. So please give your words.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, there is some technical problem. I want to thank all the presenters. It was very excellent presentation. Angie Stewart and also Liz McNeil and also Pak Budi. And also I want to greet other panelists in here. I see Ibu Jum and Kristen Graham. From UNFPA perspective, we are very grateful to be invited in this webinar and to participate in the webinar. And I personally learned a lot from what has been presented and learned how the simulation learning has been applied in Flinders University, and also to learn how it is implemented in the Airlangga University in the context of, especially right now, we are dealing with the COVID pandemic. So thank you so much for the great presentation that you've made. From UNFPA, of course, midwifery education is very important for us. It's one of our objectives to help the government in addressing the problem of high maternal mortality. That's why having a good midwifery education is crucial. And therefore, I really welcome and really thank for this webinar. And I learned also that from the discussion, we learned that simulated learning of midwifery skill is very beneficial. And simulation learning has educational and clinical impact and advantages over didactic approach. And from studies also, we learned that simulation enhance practices and reduce the time to achieve competence. However, of course, this is not to replace the actual clinical practice. So thank you again, and hopefully from what we heard today, we can apply and expand in other schools in Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay, thank you Ibu Ima for your words. Okay, and then we also have Ibu Dr. Anda Jumiarni Ilyas, Magister Kesehatan here. She is the chair of the Association of Indonesian Midwifery Education, or AWCS. So please, Ibu Yum, to give your words. Assalamualaikum, Bu Yum. Good afternoon, Bu Yum. All right, while waiting, Bu Yum, we also have Miss Kristen here. Okay, Miss Kristen Graham, please welcome to Miss Kristen Graham to give your words.
Hello, everybody.
Miss Kristen, time is yours. Yep.
Thank you so much. And look, thank you so much for the opportunity for Flinders University staff to be involved in this whole webinar series. And it's just been such a pleasure and an honor, because we've just really valued the work that we've done over the many years with Airlangga University, and the opportunities to share ideas about how to work together, about finding out how best to provide better clinical education and simulation opportunities to really help students to advance their learning and their clinical experiences. And I'm just so excited that Angie Sterling was able to provide her absolute expertise on how to work in the clinical labs. I think that's just so valuable for everybody, because there's so many logistical things to think about in this time of COVID-19. And so thank you, Angie. And Liz, your expertise activities and simulation is just fantastic to always listen to, and it's just brilliant. And I hope everybody's really gained a lot from both of their presentations. And Dr. Budi, it's a pleasure to hear about how things are working in Erlangga University to provide that Indonesian context. So I hope everybody's really had a fantastic experience of gaining more insights and some valuable advice and tips to be able to move forward in your own areas of education to make the, what is just a unique year more possible, and to come up with some amazing strategies that will work moving forwards as well, because there is certainly a new norm. And I think there's lots of innovations that we'll all be able to take advantage of. So thank you again for the opportunity for Flinders to be involved, and wish everybody the very best.
Okay, thank you, Kristen Graham. All right, I will say to please welcome to Bu Yum. Good afternoon, Bu Yum. Assalamualaikum, Bu Yum. All right, okay. While waiting for Bu Yum, maybe we can move to the discussion session. Okay, well, now let me read to the question from our audience today. Surprisingly, we have several questions here. And as I said previously, we will choose only topic-related questions, and my colleague has helped me to sort the questions. All right, the questions are mainly for Angie and Liz. And the first question is from Nurrahmi Umami. The question is, what do you think about laboratory learning through an online system or an online platform? Yeah, maybe Angie or Liz, could you answer the question?
Liz, I think I'll defer that one to you.
Thought you might.
Okay, please welcome. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And it's a very important question, actually, even though we laugh at it, because it is the reality for many places at the moment, and especially with the Northern Hemisphere coming into winter, and with a lot of countries hitting their second wave, according to the kind of results I see each morning, then it's going to be an issue for the next 6 months at least. Nothing replaces real life experience to the same degree and quality for a lot of students. However, simulation activities can do a lot of good in that they can actually focus on events that don't happen an awful lot. That's face-to-face. When we're moving it to online, then I think if it's anything than what we've had, a lot of students don't like the observer role. So when we're actually doing simulations in a group of 4 or 5, you've got maybe 3 people who have got active roles, and then you've got maybe 2 or 3 who are watching, and that's the observer role. And they don't like that role because they have this mentality that they will only learn if they're physically doing. And I think that's actually going to be one of the biggest mindset changes that needs to occur with teaching online. But I think that we need to engage the students, and engaging the students by talking to them. So watching things and then doing the debrief, but actually a critical debrief. So thinking about the Socratic questions, the why questions. So why do you think they did that? Or what do you think would happen if this occurred? Because it's those type of thinkings that the more we think about something and the more that they can visualize it, then they're going to be better when they're actually doing it. And this is actually taking from sports psychology. So you look at any of the Olympians and any of the major athletes in the world, they use sports psychologists, and they will actually visualize their whole event. There's a great example in a film called Cool Runnings, which is about the Jamaican bobsled team. Brilliant film. I cry at the end of it every single time. But he's sitting there in the bath looking at pictures of the turns and working out which way he needs to go. So he's visualizing all of that. If we can change the student mindset, and in fact some of the staff mindset too, that this rehearsal, this talking about, this watching and then unpacking is still a learning process, then I think that they're going to be better off when they finally get in there to actually physically do the skills. So that's my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz, for the very clear answers. Okay, how about you, Angie? What about you? Do you have any additional information for the question?
One moment. Yes, so what we did find was a lot of our online videos that were readily available on YouTube and things specific to some of the companies that Liz mentioned, Liddell. Some were adequate to show as a substitute for not coming in face to face. Some were not so accurate and had some issues. So we did make some of our own midwifery videos to upload for students. But I agree 100% with Liz that it's that discussing it and critically reviewing that afterwards, not just leaving the students to manage an online platform by themselves. You have to engage with them. If it's not face-to-face, it has to be online. And you have to unpack what they've watched and explore their understanding and how they think that applies. So no, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that Liz said, and just we're in a fortunate position here that our students could come back into the lab. So I feel for those universities who are still struggling with the online platform and for those students who are having a very different experience, but can only echo what Liz said, that we have to find a new way of making that platform work, because it will well be the future, the new normal.
Okay, thank you for very useful information. Yeah, honestly, also in Indonesia, we are very struggling to have like an adaptation of the laboratory skills during this pandemic, because we need to change to the online platform. And thank you so much for your answers. And then the second question, also for our speakers from Flinders, this is from Nugraha and from Ibu Yvonne. According to your experience in Flinders University, is learning process still running in the new normal era? And is there any examining condition for staff and student before doing laboratory skills? And how to evaluate learning outcome in new normal era? Yeah, so please, Liz and Angie, to answer the question.
Liz, you want to go first again?
Oh, learning is definitely still happening.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whilst at Flinders University, nursing laboratories still continued, and nursing students, especially third and second year nursing students, continued, midwifery students actually had a pause during that time. So one of the things that we have had to juggle in second semester this year is a catch-up of skills. So we ended up splitting some of the topics. So when they couldn't come into lab skills and come in physically, then we did the theory online. And then it's been a very messy semester for a lot of reasons because of COVID. But they've been coming in, we've done the smaller groups, the knowledge has to be done beforehand, and they've been coming in and basically having 3 or 4 skills that they're doing, very smaller groups and very focused. And they've realized that they need to know the theory behind it, because there's not a lot of time for them to actually be wasting and being shown if they haven't done the pre-work. Evaluation, very good question, very important question. I'm not really sure at the moment.
Yes.
It's an issue that I kind of bring up continuously in team meetings, and probably my team kind of like colleagues are sick of me talking about it. But it is something that we need to look at. And one of the things that when preparing for this, and Angie and I were sharing presentations, or she shared hers more than me, that the skills checklist, I think, is something that I'm going to be taking back to the midwifery team, because I think it's something that when you've got students who are not coming in for an assortment of reasons or things, it's also looking at pre and post. So what do they think they're confident with? What areas do they need to actually focus on? So if we can do that, it turns it back to more personalized learning, but it still puts the emphasis on the students to actually know what they're confident with. And it's been interesting. We had some student reps at a meeting. So we have student representatives from each of the 3 year levels who come and talk to the course coordinator and the placement coordinator. And it was interesting with it was all the task orientated skills that they wanted practice on. They weren't so fussed with the simulation per se, but it was the IV, it was the epidural, it was the setups, it was all of those kind of technical skills that they wanted more time in doing. And we thought that at 3rd year, they actually have enough of that. So I think checking in each year level with how the students are going, where they're feeling, is critical to get that evaluation of how you think it's done. Because at some stages, if you've got large numbers of students rotating through, students may only get 10 minutes to spend on a skill. Now, you can't learn a skill and be competent in a skill in 10 minutes. So I think we have to, like, I'm evaluation queen, that we have to kind of keep checking in with the students because it is so critical for what we do.
Okay, thank you, Liz, for the information. And what do you think, Angie? Maybe you have additional information on that?
Sure. One of the points was delivering online training. A lot of the teaching team at Flinders had never had to do that before. So there was also, not only did we have to work very quickly to write an online curriculum for the students, we had to upskill a lot of our academic staff to be able to do that and to manage those tutorials and lessons online. So there was a lot of IT support for students and staff throughout all of this, which was imperative. Liz picked up on the skills checklist, which I mentioned in my presentation, of a way of trying to keep track of what we had done well and what we perhaps need to include in future subjects. As far as the curriculum goes, the Nurses Board, and Kristen may even know more about this, there's been some allowances made for COVID restrictions, so some of the requirements have been lessened. I'm not sure exactly what those statistics are, but like less clinical hours and things like that. So whereas a topic may have required 30 hours of clinical labs, it's acceptable if you've only done half that time now. So there's sort of a new set of criteria for this year. An example of where it's been challenging was, as I said, our first years were deferred, and only this week have we brought our first year nursing students back into the laboratories. So this has meant a total rewrite of their second semester topic to include all of those skills and knowledge that we were not able to teach them online in first semester. So we're playing catch up, and we don't know what that's going to look like next year. We've got some new scaffolding of our subjects and a lot of work to do. So perhaps it's not the entire answer that the participant was seeking, I'm sorry, but we're still facing a lot of unknowns going forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Angie and Liz, for your answer. And then we also have a question from Dwi Tambupolon here. The question is, how, if one of the students or staff in Flinders University were infected when the course is ongoing, whether the whole class will be quarantined and the class will lock down temporarily? Yep. So please,
Yep,
Angie,
I can answer that. Absolutely.
Answer. Yep. Okay.
Yes. So as I highlighted in my presentation, returning to uni relied very heavily on people's honesty and not coming in if they were unwell or declaring if they were unwell. Australia has a COVID app which you download on your phone, which actually tracks where you've been, and if a person has tested positive, and they can then track that you have been exposed, you have been in contact with that person, you should go get testing. Problem with that is not every person has the COVID app. So at Flinders University, yes, if we had had a positive case, we would have notified all of the students and teaching team involved. In fact, all activity in the university for when that positive tested person was around, and classes would be cancelled and students would be advised to self-isolate for that 2-week period or until a negative test is received. We're very lucky that didn't happen. I don't know how well that would have been managed if it had have happened, but it still is potentially the case moving forward as the second wave takes hold around Australia and the world. So yes, the intention was that we would notify everybody and close the lab down for that 2 weeks.
Okay, thank you very much, Angie. And for Liz, maybe do you have any something to say about this question?
No, I'd reinforce that one of the, and I think that's the critical importance of attendance records, because, and actually keeping an accurate record of who's in that class on that day, that we can get very slack at attendance and students can kind of like come and go. So that's part of our contact tracing, and we've got a very good contact tracing system within the Department of Health here in South Australia. So if that ever occurred, and it could, my concern is it might happen over Christmas, New Year, if the borders are open and interstate people kind of come in. My greatest fear is in January, we could end up being kind of like shut down again, or parts will be shut down again, which is before semester starts in the end of February. But yeah, it would end up being, and with the midwifery team, we are a small team and we meet in the same room. And so if one student is infective, then that whole class, including that teacher, which also would mean the whole midwifery team would also be out and quarantined as well. So with the trial, and it feels strange calling it a trial run, but with the initial shutdown that we had in March, we mostly effectively taught online. Obviously, clinical skills are harder to teach online, especially to first years, but we would have to go in isolation and would continue teaching online because we didn't stop teaching at all when the March shutdown occurred. But yeah, it would wipe out the whole midwifery team, to be honest. We would all be in isolation if a student came in as positive. So we're very grateful that nobody has.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz and Angie, for your answer. And then this question is specifically for Angie from Zahra. Yeah. Okay, what is your opinion about the new normal? Are we fully ready to adapt it? Or is it really urgent to adapt it now? If it wasn't, how long could we safely do the lockdown that wouldn't affect the education? Yeah, okay. Miss Angie, time is yours.
Okay, the new normal. Yes, I believe it's here to stay. Feedback so far is that from a student perspective point of view and a student readiness for graduation, that they like the new model. So they've enjoyed the ratios, they've enjoyed the smaller classes, even though their laboratory time has been shortened. It's been rich, it's been a real rich time for learning. So we would like to see that continue. Challenges with that are enrolments continue and our numbers keep going up. So, and we've just had a change in government regulations that have announced that health sciences are critical, and so they've lowered the university fees for those courses of study moving forward. So we anticipate more enrolments. And nursing and health at Flinders University are the cash cow, for want of a better word, that we bring in the most revenue. So there will be continued pressure to keep running our program and to keep teaching tomorrow's nurses and midwives. I've forgotten the second part of that question, Andy. Can you tell me again, please, Verita?
Okay, how long could we safely do the lockdown?
Oh,
yep.
Yes.
How long could we safely do the lockdown? Yeah.
As I said, luckily in South Australia, it didn't impact on us so much. We were really only closed to labs for about a month before we brought students back in. But if we have a second wave and we go into lockdown like some of our interstate colleagues, I don't know. I think what this has taught us is how resilient and creative we are. And I'll go back to the comment that Liz made about the importance of an online platform and how well we manage that, and what that new normal looks like, and what our expectations out of a teaching on that platform are. It's very, my experience is it's all been very one-sided. We develop this amazing stuff and fancy videos and lots of photos, and the onus is on the student to immerse in that and learn from that. But I think we're going to have to make sure that it's followed up with a lot of face-to-face online stuff as well. So that's how I see the new normal. I hope that we don't have to close the labs, because it is the most fun way to learn, and certainly the students get the most satisfaction out of that time here, although it's stressful in that environment. But I hope this is our new normal, with smaller classes. And we keep the social distancing going. That's my fear. My fear is that they'll say our COVID cases are so low that we no longer need to apply the precautions, and that's when I personally will be very, very worried.
Okay, thank you very much, Angie, for your answer. All right, one of our participants, Jamie, her name is Jamie, seems that maybe she's curious about the condition in Australia. Her question is, does the 1 person per 2 meters square, the regulation about it, is truly applied in all area of Australia? And does this policy reduce the number of COVID-19 transmission there? Okay, so please, Liz, could you answer this question?
Different states have different requirements. So we have in South Australia a 1.5 social distancing measure. I think Western Australia have reduced it to 1 metre, or we're going to reduce it to 1 metre. I think that some of the other states are looking at 2, or are still closing for capacity. Mind you, driving past a public place on the weekend, there was no social distancing happening in Henley Beach Square. It was absolutely packed, and even the lineup for the ice cream, while people were standing in a normal queue. So whilst we are very lucky here, we also know that the same things are happening interstate. So even in Victoria, which has the tightest regulations, and Melbourne in particular has the tightest regulations in the country, they are still finding and fining, the police are fining people for having parties in their homes. So you're not meant to have more than 5 people in your home. You're not meant to go more than 5 Ks for driving. They've got a curfew that you're not meant to be out on the roads after 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock in the morning. So they're very quite strict, and they're hoping to release some of those restrictions next weekend. Regional Victoria has a little bit more capacity. In churches, though, they can still only have 10 people, including the minister. Weddings are still at 10 to 20, depending on where you are. And funerals are still, you can have more people at a funeral, but you have to be socially distanced. So even in our lecture theatre at university, we still have the marks on the chairs and crosses on the chairs of where you can sit. So you're meant to have 2 people, 2 chairs between each student sitting, or you're meant to be at least kind of like arm's length away from somebody. So each state is different, and we're different to what I think the UK is, and we're different to what the America is. But whilst we've got regulations and people can be fined for not doing them, there's a lot of people who don't believe in it, who have never had the experience of seeing somebody with COVID, or they've gotten over it. They haven't seen somebody who's recovering or who's got long COVID. And with the 27,000 people, majority of them have recovered in Australia. With the long COVID people, it's a very small percentage. And though we still don't know a lot about long COVID, we're learning more and more from America and from the UK and from Europe about that. But I think Australia, we've been, we're getting complacent, to be honest, I think, because we haven't had it to the same degrees. Victorians would disagree with that because they've had the blunt of the restrictions. I hope that answers.
Okay, thank you, Liz, for your sharing. All right, talking about the social distancing, it is one of our regulation that very strictly we announce it for the people, and then we hope that the people obey with this regulation. And maybe Dr. Budi Prastio, could you share the regulation, the implementation of regulation about social distancing in Surabaya particularly? Okay, Dr. Budi, could you share your experience or opinion?
Yeah, I think in Surabaya, I think it's also the same, yeah, because we do the physical distancing especially, and we have a rule that everyone must use a mask when they go outside, and there are some fund that find that they will implement it if we go outside without the mask. And our government has mass screening in highway, in a road, that everyone that didn't use mask will be fined as a regulation in Surabaya. I think there is Valida. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Budi, for your opinion about our social distancing regulation in Surabaya particularly. All right. We also have a question, but this question is a little bit out of topic, but I think it's quite important to discuss. From Dian Herawati, she will ask about how about the ratio of student and patient or client in practical learning of midwifery in Australia? Because in Indonesia, we have a lot of have to serve a client for a practical lesson. Yeah, and there is a big gap ratio, yeah, of student and client, and we have the kind of problem. Okay, maybe Angie, could you share your experience about it? Thank you.
You're on mute, Angie.
Sorry, I have to say that I couldn't actually hear the question very well. There was a noise issue.
Okay.
Liz, did you hear it?
I will repeat again. Okay, I will repeat again the question. This question actually a little bit out of the topic, but it's still important for us. This question is from Dian Herawati. She will ask about how about the ratio between the student and patient in practice of midwifery student in Australia, because we are in Indonesia are struggling with the ratio between student and patient for practical lesson in a clinical setting. Yeah, could you share your experience, Angie?
Sorry, I didn't hear that properly the first time. Okay, so the ratio between student placement in the clinical setting. I, as well as working at Flinders University, work as an agency midwife on the weekends, so I can talk to it from that point of view. Usually, students are placed with a midwife or a registered nurse as a one-on-one in the clinical setting. I'm not sure if the question is more about availability of women giving birth to Liz or Kristen, if you have any thoughts on this.
Not only. Yes, maybe Kristen or Liz can add some information about the ratio, the number of patients or mothers that can be the student can do a midwifery care for the patient. Do you have like a ratio between the student and the patient in clinical setting?
Kristen, do you want to chime in?
Yeah.
Okay, so please, Kristen, please unmute your Zoom. Yep.
Sorry, thank you.
Okay.
There is no requirement for students to have worked with a certain amount of women at a time, and it depends on what year they are. And so we would hope by the time that somebody's graduating, that if they're working in a postnatal ward, that they would have, working with a midwife, they would be caring for quite a number of women. And so Angie, you probably would have more of an idea of this, but I think in many states at the moment, there is a ratio of about 1 midwife to, if you're working in a ward, 1 midwife to 4 women on an early shift. 6? Oh la la. Okay. So, so we probably wouldn't expect obviously our rules are different here in South Australia than others, where it is a 1 to 4 ratio. That's okay. Midwives work hard in South Australia. So that we would expect that they would be able to be caring for all of those 6 women with that midwife, and or having a smaller number that they are really primarily caring for with the supervision of a midwife, because you do not want a graduate having only ever cared for 2 women on a ward and then all of a sudden working as a midwife and being responsible for 6, because it's important that they have those time management skills. And so certainly that number of women that a midwifery student would care for would be very, very small at the beginning, and then would increase over time as they have more experience. If they're working in a labour and birthing area, generally it would be just one-on-one. So 1 midwifery student, 1 midwife to 1 woman, because they need that more intensive support. Again, if they're working in special care nursery, it would be a little bit different. Angie, you would know again the ratios for special care nursery. What would that be normally?
Yeah, 1 to 2 to 3, depending on the acuity of the baby.
Yeah.
And the availability of the mother.
Okay, so 1 to 2 or 3. All right. Okay, we just need to try. Are struggling to have mothers. I mean, like the students we have so many students, but the mothers in the clinical setting is not only as many as like a student. Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you, Kristen and Angie, for your answer. All right. We also have a question for Dr. Budi from Niken Kumala Budi. Okay, so the question is, how long the ideal time to practice in small groups? Maybe Dr. Budi, could you answer the question from Niken?
Okay, thank you. I think it's depend on the competency and objective that we need to achieve. That this is important to set the scenario of simulation clearly. But usually we do the simulation, I think, for about 10 until 15 minutes. So if we if the time is more than that, I think the scenario is very complicated, and it is very hard for our student. And it's scenario, I think we do the 1 or 2 scale that we can want to achieve. So I think for about 10 until 15 minutes, depend on the knowledge and skill that we want to achieve for the learner. Thank you, Mr. Fadila.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Budi, for your answer. All right, because of time, maybe this question is the last question. The question is from Emma Sita. Okay, good afternoon. My name is Emma Sita. I'm from South Sulawesi. Emma Sita is asking about the, according to your opinion, is it effective to do online practice learning for midwife students during COVID-19? Yeah, actually, we have discussed it, but I think Emma Sita would like to explore more about it. And if it is not, would you mind to give some suggestions for another option to change the method? Okay, maybe Angie, could you answer the question?
I think this is Liz's absolute expertise, this one. If that's okay,
Okay.
I'll defer to
Yep.
Liz.
Okay, Liz, could you answer? Okay. Okay,
honest,
thank you. Liz.
Actually don't have a choice.
No.
We have to be able to deliver education online. This has been coming for a few years now. And when you look at, and especially in the higher education setting globally, that when you look at education delivery, universities are unfortunately cost-cutting because of a variety of reasons, especially in Australia. MOOCs, which are massive online learning opportunities and courses, have occurred since technology kind of started. So to allow for student flexibility, universities are looking for students because students bring in money. Therefore, they're looking to be able to deliver their education across boundaries and across borders. Online education allows them to basically offer a course that any student in any country can do. Now, for courses like midwifery in particular, where there is a very high component of practical skills, we need to be innovative. We have to keep face-to-face education, especially for those clinical skills, because that allows us to fine-tune how students are doing it. But we need, and it's frustrating because I don't like the term, we need to teach smarter, because I think we are teaching smarter. But we do need to be increasingly innovative with how we teach. And that comes back to evaluation. What have we done? What has worked? And it's actually really important that we work in partnership with students. So whereas universities were very much about the academics telling the student how to learn, I think we need to be more of a partnership and actually finding out what works with students. And therefore, once we kind of get that partnership working with students and get the feedback from them of what works and what doesn't, we then have the knowledge of being able to change and modify the components that doesn't. We are not going to be able to satisfy every single student doing the same thing. So we need to be able to develop multiple modalities of education. And a lot of our base knowledge will end up being online because of the convenience. But unfortunately, it's also going to be at a cost of probably larger class sizes for the academic. And that is something that I really am not looking forward to, because you lose that interaction with students. In clinical settings, we need to be able to prove with educational theory, with pedagogy, with andragogy, with the resources behind us, that we need to stick with clinical face-to-face sessions. But technology such as virtual reality, mixed reality, is going to be able to supplement what we do. So students can learn, develop muscle memory by using some of this technology that's coming through. But to be able to fine-tune that technology, to fine-tune those skills, we still need to be able to do face-to-face. So it's going to be up to us as educators and academics to actually fight the fight to keep those face-to-face classes. And if it's like what it used to be, that you did the majority of your topic distant and then you came in for intensives. So you used to come in for universities for a week and all you did in that week was face-to-face sessions. We may need to end up doing that, which is a complete rewrite of curriculum, but it still gets that face-to-face. The one thing we have to be very careful of is cognitive overload, because if we demand students learn too much, they're actually not going to learn it. So we need to make sure that even if we're doing it online and face-to-face, we still need to scaffold that information and still need to scaffold the way that they learn. And it's an exciting time to be in a way, of seeing what comes out, but we also need to make sure that we don't lose what we know works.
Okay, thank you very much, Liz, for amazing answer. All right, I think we have very exciting discussions, but unfortunately our time is up. Thank you very much for your kind attention, especially for the questions. Thank you, Angie, Liz, and Dr. Budi for the amazing presentation and very exciting discussion. Thank you for all audiences for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and participation. Finally, from the deepest of my heart, I do apologize for any inconvenience in moderating this event, and I give the session back to the host. So please, Ibu Andika, to take over.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Farida. Such interesting discussion. And we have finally come to the end of our webinar. I would like to say thank you to all our honorable speakers from Angie Serlan and Liz McNeil from Nursing and Midwifery College and Nursing and Health Sciences Winter University, and to Dr. Budi Prasetyo, obstetrician medical doctor, obstetrician consultant from Faculty Medicine of Universitas Erlangga, and to our panelists, Kristen Graham and Ibu Dr. Danda Jumiani Ilyas dan Ibu Rismawati Imarianti. We are very grateful to have all of you here today and give us an interesting discussion. And to all participants, thank you for your participation. On behalf of Faculty of Medicine Universitas Erlangga and Erlangga Webinar Conference Committee Series, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today at Midwifery Webinar Series 1, 2, and 3. We really hope that today's presentation and discussion will give a new informative to improve our midwifery education in Indonesia and to become professional midwife and give a significant impact to our maternal and neonatal health. Let me speak in bahasa for a while. Saya ucapkan terima kasih banyak atas kehadiran partisipan pada kegiatan webinar 1, 2, dan 3. Untuk kegiatan seri 1 dan 2, sertifikat telah kami kirimkan ke email masing-masing bagi peserta yang telah melakukan registrasi dan mengikuti webinar secara penuh. Untuk yang seri 3 hari ini, kami mengingatkan untuk mengisi kuesioner sebagai salah satu syarat untuk mendapatkan sertifikat webinar hari ini. Dan mohon maaf apabila ada kekurangan selama pelaksanaan webinar Midwifery Series dari sesi 1, 2, dan 3. And to all of midwives around the world, keep shine and proud to become midwife and caring women and children with love and compassion. Well, see you next time. Keep healthy and happy. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Warahmatullahi
Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you so much. Kristen,
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you for joining us today.
There everybody is.
Nice
So
to see faces.
All right.
So on this occasion, we will take a picture together.
Okay.
In 3, 2, 1. Okay. One more. In 3, 2, 1. Maybe you could open your screen if you haven't. In 3, 2, 1.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
See you, Angie.
You're welcome.
Liz.
Be safe, people.
Thank you. Stay healthy, everyone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Huge from Surabaya. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.